Hello again. This is the first lecture of Service Design Innovation, where we are going to look into what is a service and what do we mean with service innovation. To be able to upload this lecture online, I have divided in two main parts. So this class, as I was saying, is an introductory one. So we're trying to introduce why we are talking about service design today. How can we classify what are the definitions of service, even if these have been evolving. So I will give you just the basis definitions, and then maybe we will integrate, and then I will introduce the areas of service innovation. First of all, design, the way we conceive design is a very wide in scope understanding, because design is the human power of conceiving, planning and making products that serve human beings. So somehow this means that the scope of design becomes universal, because it can be applied for the creation of any human-made product. This kind of understanding of design enables us to move it from the traditional application of design to product, to physical and tangible objects, to different kind of subject matter like service and service innovation. So design in different way from other kind of disciplines has no special subject matter. So somehow, because of this universal scope, we can bring what we know as design thinking, this kind of approach to problem solving and ideation creation, to almost any area of a human experience. So that is why somehow in the years design has been changing, has been evolving, has been transforming. But in particular because we are in a context that has been changed. So we are not facing anymore some of the complicated and challenges and problems we faced in the past. We are now, of course, looking at issues like climate change, chronic conditions, immigration, aging population, and so on, that are somehow challenging the way we have been so far used design. So you might have seen this graph, which is very used in design to show how in the years design has been growing and has been scaling up from focusing on the more traditional competences and applications that still exist and has a very strong value in design, which are graphic communication design, product design, interior design, or design applied to different fashion design, different areas of tangible things, toward an area called also action, so the designing of actions and interactions with different kind of systems, to then go to the wider scale that is described as environment and system design. So gradually design has been scaling up in terms of scope, and of course the knowledge, the skills, the approaches needed to change in order to address this different complexity. So the growth of complexity has led to the introduction of new forms of design. So today you might still see, of course, traditional applications like graphic design, information design, product design, then interaction design, then the emerging on service design, toward area like system design, organization design, or, for example, recently design for policy, and so on. So we are gradually increasing the complexity of where design is applied, which means, of course, the transformation of the skills, the education programs, but also the way of working of design, which needs to work more and more in a multidisciplinary manner and being able to address problems that are bigger than the traditional scale. Why this? Because if we need to face and address issues, for example, like climate change, or dealing with issues like logistics and mobility, for example, in urban areas or in other areas, how can we do this by just focusing on one single product? So in order to have a wider impact, bigger impact on society, on significant challenges, design somehow need to scale up, no, and need to have a role in a more strategic position, like happened maybe in organizations. The other aspect that is changing is that because of the complexity of issues, because of the need to have somehow multidisciplinary teams working together, there is also a search for new integrative disciplines that are able somehow to converge, integrate the knowledge from different disciplines and address and develop a process of innovation. And somehow design processes, design practices are often considered as this ability to integrate the useful knowledge from different fragmented specialized disciplines in order to better address problems or the complexity of the challenge that designers are facing. So somehow, in a design process, you can bring in issues and knowledge from product design, infrastructures, logistics, health, policy, behavior change, issues around pollution or information technology. So somehow the ability to create a space, a collaboration, convergence of this knowledge is fundamental when we design for complex challenges and within complex systems. So in the 90s, we have seen gradually the emergence of service design as a field of practice, a field of research. This has been associated with a growing economic role of the service sector, like many other disciplines gradually evolved toward the area of service and service innovation. And this, of course, has to be done in relation to instead maybe a design tradition that was still attached to the traditional industrial sector. But today, if you look around, you can see now that service design has been developed in a global way. You can see many agencies that are specialized in service design, or you can find other consultancies that are big design consulting or business consultancies that are developing service design units. So service design now, you are in a better situation than a few years ago because you can see that there is a lot of demand, and not only within consultancies, but now we can see that many designers work within also private organizations where maybe they create innovation labs, service design units, or where somehow service design integrates with other competencies. There is still a lot to do in the understanding, defining of the profile, but surely it is a more, let's say, attractive discipline. I would invite you to start looking around, to look for sources of knowledge, both in the academic and non-academic environments, and digital environments or conferences, events. For example, we hosted 2 years ago the Service Design International Conference that now will be in Australia. So you can find all the conference archive with all the papers. There is the Service Design Network, there is a global network mostly driven by professionals, which has been very active in creating awareness around this discipline, and they have very many conferences happening in different places at different levels. So this is also an area and a venue where to find information. They have reports that have been doing. So this is a very brief, just to give you a brief introduction to why we're talking about service design and why it's been emerging. Let's have a look now on what do we mean when we talk about service. And I will start with very traditional literature. But of course we will add later on more recent understanding. If we talk about the service sector, there are different ways to understand this sector. There are different kinds of services that are very, very different. So if we design for a social service, it's very different if we do for a transport storage services, for example, or financial. So the service sector is a very wide sector where they have all different quality, different challenges, and different growth prospects. At the same time, the distinction of service from products is not so neat, no? Because if we consider the level of tangibility as one of the qualities of service, we might go from services that are very intangible, that are based on professional performance like teaching, consultancy, toward realities where services are integrated maybe in products. No? Cars are products, physical products, but now with ICT, but also with support services are integrated somehow. Then service somehow can be understood as performances, no? So if we understand services as performances producing results, then somehow service can be represented as a complementary and alternative solution to physical products. But there are differences, because if I have a car on my own, I own the product, I have my own competency applied to the service fruition, so it means that I have to have a driving license and I need to carry out the activity on my own. While if we design a car sharing or a taxi company or a service provision, this changes. So the competence, the activity is divided and the tool can only be accessed. So there are many specific characteristics that somehow can be have been developed to describe what a service is compared to a product. No? So customers do not obtain ownership of a service. So if I use a bike sharing, the bike is not mine. Okay, and often service products are not in an inventory. They are ephemeral because they are performances. There are many intangible elements that dominate value creation. Also, customers may be involved in the production process, like many other people. There can be variability in the operational inputs and outputs, and many services are difficult for customers to evaluate because they are intangible. So if I need to acquire an insurance, it's difficult to understand and compare. So there has been in time the identification of four main characteristics of services. These have been doubted because not all services are intangible or inseparable or perishable or that dominated heterogeneity. This is also because of the advent of digital technologies. Not somehow that makes, for example, this lecture, instead of being made in person, so being, let's say, inseparability between me and the user. Now with technology I can do it in a direct way. The only characteristic that somehow remains the key characteristic of service, and which is agreed as being the one characterizing service compared to the traditional product, is non-ownership. What does it mean? That services involve a form of rental or access, in which customers obtain benefits by gaining the right to use a physical object. So I can have rented goods services. No, I rent a flat. I can have place and space rentals. I can labor and expertise rentals, so I can ask for a consultancy service. Physical facility access and usage, so a catering service or network access and usage like mobile companies. So the idea is that somehow that's why somehow services are associated with sustainability, because instead of everyone buying something, a product, we generally access a service that can be shared. These are just some general characteristics of services, and the understanding of service has been evolved. Let's have a look instead with a more traditional understanding of service. Now, if we need to design a service, we need also to be able to define it. Okay? And depending on how we define it, we might approach the design in a different manner. So, for example, a service might be considered as a performance. Now, I am a teacher, I am doing a performance at the moment via a video registration, but I could be in person doing an activity. Or it can be a relationship, so I am establishing a relationship with with the student, for example, like a babysitting or also a doctor, no? Or it can be considered as a system, as an organization that organizes different physical and human elements in order to deliver a service. So there are different ways we can understand a service. It is a performance, it can be understood as an offering, as a process, as an interaction, as an interface, or as a system. No? There are different ways. So and it's very important to understand these different perspectives, because depending on how we understand service, we might use different tools and different understandings. So if I consider a service as, for example, a performance, I might consider different kind of activities and understanding which are different from understanding service as a process. So from more an engineering perspective, for example. No? Or if we look at it as a system, a complex system. Let's have a look at this different understanding. So, a performance. Service is any kind of activities or advantage that one party can exchange with the other, whose nature is mainly intangible and that doesn't involve any ownership. So, again, I am a teacher, I am an actor, I'm doing a theater performance, no? I am a consultant that is developing and providing my knowledge and expertise in order to improve problems. And somehow this doesn't involve any ownership, because you don't have to own specific objects often in order to acquire or have this access this performance or activity. Of course, not performances are always based somehow on some forms of objects. Then services can be understood also as a set of offering. No? Generally a service has a primary function, let's say flying from Milan to Helsinki. No? Flying is the main function of a flight company, and then there are secondary functions which are a set of advantages that define what the service is. So, for example, the way you do the check-in, you buy the tickets, the way the kind of catering available, the spaces in the airports, or the insurances, and so on. So there are a set of advantages that you can find through interacting with the service. And these advantages are the ones that somehow differentiate a service from another. And it's a very, let's say, marketing-oriented way of understanding a service. So when you define a service, you need to define what the service is able to do. But then, in order to deliver those offerings, you need to have a background, a back office, a sequence of activity, a process, no? That is made up by a sequence of activities that is able to support the delivery of a service. So think about a restaurant, no? In order to be able to access food in a restaurant, there is a kitchen that maybe have a monthly menu design, and then they have to have an orders management, they have to have a turns management with the personnel, and they have to have, of course, daily menu preparation activities, there is the cleaning, and so on. So in order to deliver a service like a restaurant, there are a certain kinds of activities, operations that needs to be developed. Another way instead to consider a service is from a system perspective. There is this term, very old term, which is servaction, instead of production system. So the idea that service as a supply system, which is a coherent systematic organization of all the physical and human elements that compose the client company, and that somehow enable the service performance. And this is an organizational perspective, a management perspective, where you somehow try to understand when you want to deliver a certain service with a certain quality, what kind of organizational model, what kind of business model, no, what kind of supply chain you need to put in place in order to deliver that kind of service. So this is also a fundamental way of considering service, because there is something of the service which is visible. No, we go in an airport, there are the spaces, retailers, check-in and control area and so on, with different clients, with different services interacting. But then there is an internal organizational system that might not be visible, but it is a fundamental part of the service. And so somehow when we design a service, we need to consider both what is visible to the user. There is an internal line of visibility that defines what is visible from what is not visible. So, I don't know, in a simple example of a restaurant, I might decide that people can see the kitchen, no? But maybe they don't see the organizational part, but at least the kitchen, the processes of cooking might be visible. So there is a line of visibility that somehow can be moved. And for sure there is a big part of a service that needs to be designed, which is the organizational system. And then on the user side, there is instead the service interaction, the service experience. So a service can be described as a series of service encounters, touch points, moments of truth. So these are different ways of defining this part of the service, which somehow focuses on the experiential and temporal dimension of services. So we look at service interaction, service experience in the moment we want to understand what is the actual quality of the service, no? Because we can have the best organizational machine, with the best idea of a service concept, but then if the experience of people is not adequate, of course, then the service won't be demanded and used. So understanding how this interaction happens between users and the service system is another fundamental part of service provision. Connected with the idea of service interaction is also the concept of service interface, and you surely have been hearing about service interface or touch points in your initial semester, because it is the part that generally designers put more emphasis on. So the design of all the elements that somehow enable the interaction with the service. So they might be people in their appearance and behaviors. It might be tools, so objects or machines that you interact with. It might be a physical place, the sensorial environment with which you interact or you go through or you navigate, or the information which are both the functional information that is provided in a written form or in an oral manner through people, and the symbolic information which somehow is associated, for example, with the identity, with the branding of a service. So this is another fundamental element that somehow needs to be designed to make a service accessible, usable, and pleasurable. All these elements somehow compose what service design is about. So even if service design as design a design discipline is mostly focused on understanding designing for the service interactions and service interface, so the part that is visible to user, where we can bring the most of our competencies and abilities. At the same time, you can't design a service without thinking about what is the offering, how it is the service different maybe from the within the market and the competitors, or with whom it's collaborating, how is it positioned, and the service system, which is the processes that allow the service delivery, the organizational model, the partnerships, the logistics, the infrastructure that somehow is behind the service provision. So this course somehow will go and touch on some of these dimensions. This is just an initial introduction to at least start developing a language around service design. And in the second part of this lecture, we will look instead into a general understanding of service innovation. So what does it mean innovating in the service sector, in the service domain?